Welcome to Pacenotes, podcast about all things Porsche. My name is Matt, and this is Greg. And today we're going to go over our 911 ST build. So we started out on a 1972 911T. The original color was sepia brown. And this was a car that we thought was a good candidate because, well, it was a T, so we thought this was a good candidate because the color was sepia brown, and rather than restoring a sepia brown T, which I personally like, but a lot of customers wouldn't like, we thought that it would be a good starting point for an ST build that we've been talking about doing for a while.
And 72 is the more iconic year for STs. STs are some of our favorite cars anyways, for being obvious reasons, the oil flapper, right?
Yeah, and they were just, it was just such an uncommon, there's not a lot of talk about STs. You hear about RSRs, you hear about RSs, you hear about, but the STs were kind of a lot of people who aren't huge Porsche people don't really know about them. And, originally they were S's with T trim, correct?
Right. Yeah, people would, race teams or just individuals wanting to get into street racing would order, you want to get that high-end S engine and powertrain, but they didn't want all the way. They didn't want the aluminum deco trim and all the other fancy stuff. Just keep it kind of bare bones, but not be a factory race car.
Okay. And originally they didn't have to come with flares, right? It was just...
Yeah, I mean, they were just kind of hodgepodges. They were, depending on the usage and how the customer spec'd them out. They could have... they could be narrow bodies, they could have rear flares, they could have front and rear flares. And it wasn't really until like 72 that started to kind of solidify.
I think even though that the ST didn't always have to have flares, the ST flares are my favorite because it's just a different look. It's a unique look. They're both 9 inch in the front and rear.
Yeah, they're not staggered.
Yeah, and it was more of a bubbly look rather than, the turbo and the RSR flares kind of had like a taper at the end.
Right.
And so I really like the ST flares. That's kind of why we wanted to do this. And then 72 was a good year to do it because that was the last year that, was it the last, could you get an ST?
I mean, you can always order it kind of the way you want, but 72 was the iconic year. Yeah. Once the RSRs came out, that was kind of the way to go there.
Yeah.
It was the Kramer cars that really kind of put the STs on the map. People picture like the hippie car, the green kind of hippie Kramer car.
And so let's kind of back into, so the 72, we started with that year because, that was the year the 2.4 came out. And so it was the higher model engine, 71, they had the 2.2. And so in 72, they called what was it? The U.S. version was the T.
They were the TE. So E is in the mechanical fuel injection.
Because they were testing the mechanical fuel injection on the Americans, right?
Correct.
Which was good in our favor.
Sure, and we had stricter emissions at that point, so the MFI kind of catered towards that.
Now, 72 and 73. European models were carbureted, right?
Right. It was considered the TV, or the Vergasser is what the V is. For it would be carbureted for us. Most people don't refer to them as TEs or TVs, but it's just kind of a internal moniker that they got.
We were talking about that earlier, and it wasn't something I thought about. I've seen it, but it was just like, oh, cool, it's just a T. Like, if you put a TV or a TE when you're like listing a car online, people would be like, what the hell is that?
What is this? Yeah. Porsche and the customers really love to have acronyms, so gotta pile them on there.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, 72s are just a great, I don't know, they're just a great base for a hot rod build. Some consider a sacrilege or cutting up a unique 1 year only body.
But at the same time, it's good for a build. I like 72, 70. If you're going to do a long hood build, 72, 73, I would say is the year to do it because usually you saw 72 and 73s had less rust underneath because they're galvanizing the bottom of the car.
Right.
The whole car wasn't galvanized yet, but the bottom was. So you see less rust there. So it is good it is ideal for when you're doing a long hood build besides backdating. I personally like just using an actual long hood.
Exactly.
other aspects of the 72, the shift, so it was a 915 with a 901 shifter.
Yeah,
right?
so it was the first year of the 915. So it went to, the H pattern shift that we're all used to now, which was really common, obviously, in the U.S. from the Detroit 4-speed. They just added, if you option the 5th speed, they put that over on the right. But way more usable on the road, right?
I remember when I first, because 72, 73, very similar, but because they both have the 915, 2.4, but and I was used to the 73. The first time I got into 72, I went to go shift. I was like, it just felt sloppy, and most likely that one was just sloppy in general.
Yeah.
But you can tell with that 915 shifter, it's a little more solid.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of cool to get into them. You just see just the little aspects that just change throughout the years. And, you could tell that Porsche did the 915 in this car in 72, and they're like, okay, we should probably change the shifter too, because it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it's those iterative changes that you can start to see over.
So when it's not an original car, it's definitely something you want to change out.
Right, exactly.
And that will be changed out on this.
Absolutely. There's a lot of other changes you got to make since it is the first year, the 915. We'll be using that transmission, but with a lot of updates to it, which we'll talk about more in a future podcast about the powertrain.
So partly because we know what we want to do yet, but we haven't fully dialed it in. So there's still a few decisions we're going to make, so we're going to hold off on that one and save it for another episode here.
Definitely.
Let's dive into the body. We talked a little about the flares. On this particular car, it is not a complete tribute 100%. We are doing ST hot rod.
Correct. ST inspired.
Part of that whole talk will be when we talk about the engine. That it's not going to be a stock, one of the ST common engine builds that you see.
Sure.
But as far as the body goes, we've got the ST flares, and the ST flares that you go and try to get nowadays, they're not like there's no stamping for them. There's actually, these were actually custom hand rolled that we had to go and find and buy and all that stuff. It's not like you can go to Restoration Design and get the stamped ones. They have, so these are actually hand rolled. Actually, you can get them from Restoration Design, but they're actually like custom. There's a couple.
Yeah, STs. There's no set. This is what an ST flare is like. You can look at historic photos and try and really piece that together. But I know, like I mentioned, the Kramers before, they actually ran more of like a 10-inch flare. So you could fit, a 10 by 15 or even 11 by 15 in there, because they want to get that edge on the track. The ST flare, the typical ST flare is considered to be 9-inch, so they can fit a 9 by 15 in there.
Because even back in the day, they were just kind of hand. It wasn't like it was like, this is an ST flare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we talk about flares. There's so many out there. You talk about ST flares and RSR flares and turbo flares, and then SC flares and RS flares. Sticking towards these larger flares, the 9-inch and above, there are differences. We could have easily put 930 turbo flares on here, which are 9s in the front, 11s in the rear. They're not expensive. They're very obtainable, but they're not what I would consider to be appropriate for an ST inspired build.
Turbo flares, and people do that, and it still looks really good. But I just really like the bubbly look of the ST flares, and especially in the front, it's got that nice, just rounded all the way out to the tire.
Yeah, the turbo flare is a little more squared off around the circumference, and they've got a more like a symmetrical opening, whereas the STs and the RSRs, they kind of taper in a little bit more.
In the front, yeah. And I noticed that on the RSRs, the rears look like turbo flares, maybe a little more tapered, but the front are definitely. I almost think that they're basically like an ST flare in the front of the RSRs. But yeah, so that was. So I do like that front taper rather than just like a cut to the wheel.
Right. It makes you pick out. You have to make your wheel choices appropriately, because I've seen some ST flares where, they kind of overhang the wheel a bit too much, and so it almost, it gives it kind of a droopy vibe. So you have to pick
Kinda
your
gotta fit
flares.
your wheels and tires on it before you actually put the flares on. And
Or just
that's
make
the
sure you
best
pay
way to do it.
attention to that. Get some synergy there.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, that's a very common question we get when we're building hot rods for people, or, what flares do I go with? Beyond just size,
Yeah.
RSR flares. And we're talking 73 RSR, not the fiberglass 74s and above that were ginormous, 14 inches and had vents and all that.
Stay away from those.
Yeah, we're not fiberglass fans, so.
So, and then also on this, we've done, we cut out so there is, even though this is 72, we don't have the oil flapper, we cut that out, and we did we did the surround around the actual oil tank, so.
Yeah.
And, so we had someone fabricate that for us, and that turned out pretty cool. Same thing with the front hood. We've got the fuel inlet there.
Yeah,
Right?
so it's a center fill 100-liter tank through the hood. So we sealed up the gas door. So, we don't have two flaps on this. We have a single flap for, I guess, simplicity. You can call it a Smyrna S style
Do we
oil
even
door.
have a single flap?
Well, I guess we don't have any flaps.
There's no flaps.
Single.
It's
a dual
zero
cap
flap.
setup.
It's a non-flapper.
Speaking of our lack of interest in fiberglass, we did fabricate aluminum front and rear bumpers on this. And that was a big piece of this build because
I think that was partly because it was really hard to find a front bumper that was going to fit this, and then
and if you could, it was fiberglass. And I'm just never a fan of fiberglass, and it's just all these composites and a steel body. They take paint differently, they crack.
And when someone said they could make an aluminum bumper for us, we're like, yeah, that's
that
sounds
too.
awesome. Front and rear. I mean, and it turned out really cool, actually.
Yeah. It's a matter of resources, and we were able to find something that can work with aluminum really well. So
so that's going to be a really cool aspect to this car. So next, we color of the car. We chose Smyrna Green.
Okay.
Smyrna. We'll call it Smyrna. And this is a 356 color, correct? 62 and 63.
62 and 63.
And we chose this color because, mainly it looked cool. And it was still a Porsche color.
Exactly.
And a lot of the 356 colors were awesome.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a love-hate color. I love the non-metallic pastel colors. It's gotten more popularity with the paint to sample program, so you see more, GT3s run around with them and stuff. But, everyone that's come in, there's no in between on it. It's just, if say it's the worst color they've ever seen.
Which I was shocked at. The first time I saw it, this is awesome. This is the best one yet. And then we had a customer come in there that's a terrible color. And I was like, and he points at Irish green, and I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
This is so much cooler.
Yeah.
Maybe not. There's a lot of people
that
like Irish green, so I'm sorry if you like Irish green. But
when you deal with these things all day and you see the same colors, the sepias and the light ivories and the guards reds and great colors, it's just, you like to see something different.
Yeah.
You like to see something that kind of is iconic for that period. So Smyrna is just, I love it.
Oh yeah, it's great. Well, we were thinking about jade also, but jade was a little too light, I think. So we wanted to go something in that kind of direction, and we liked the blues and the greens. We were also kind of finishing up Oslo, and Oslo was blue, so we didn't want to choose that color. So we
Couldn't be
didn't choose
too blue.
So we thought this was a good cross, and I am happy we did it. So
Absolutely.
we'll see. Definitely leave some comments if you like it.
Right. And it is
We'd
finished.
like to see it. If you don't like it, then don't leave any comments, please. Don't.
Yeah, only good comments. It is finished in a Glazeret 2-stage. That's a question we always get is, single stage, dual stage.
Well, dual stage is easier to work with.
It's just easier to work with. You get a clear coat out of it, less maintenance. Two schools of thought there, and
well, if you're going to restore a car back to all original or something, single stage because that's what they did back in the day. But I dual stage is a nice way to go.
Right.
Otherwise,
so suspension, which in these early stages of the project, the first thing we want to do is get brakes and suspension up so we can make the car roller and make it easy to free up a lift and make it easy to move around as it goes between various stages in the shop. Suspensions, as you'd imagine, one of the the more important choices and systematic choices we have to make with these cars, because it can be very very complicated, and one choice over here may not blend well with another choice.
Well, especially when you're adding a bunch of power to these cars,
Right.
And this, we haven't talked about the engine, but, it definitely is going to need some extra suspension.
Right.
When we were doing restorations, it's like, okay, Bilsteins, Conies, Bosch, like those were your options. And now, with these hot rod builds, you got Coilovers, you got Bilstein, you got KW, you got, who the Elephant used, Vaughn's, all that. So there's a lot of options there.
Right, and you're picking brands or you're picking technologies. So, I mean, again, the two camps there is, torsion-based coilovers. And with torsions, you're limited in the size of the torsions you're picking. You're kind of limited in a small camp of what type of bushings you're using. And then what inserts and shocks. You go to coilovers, and now you have to start playing with those bushings. You're not going to really use coilovers and stock rubber bushings. So, there's a lot more to factor in.
So on this one, we chose the Bilsteins, right?
Right. And traditionally, we've been doing a lot of KWs for the past 2 or 3 builds.
Which are great. We like those
fantastic.
a lot.
Here we want to go more of an error-correct look. The Bilstein Rsr Struts, I mean, they're fantastic looking. I mean, they're all threaded. They just look great. They come with a kind of a club sport track-ready dampening. They're not fully adjustable, so you have to do some custom dampening there, which we'll do for a street ride. But you have to really pick and plan your spring rates, just like you would torsion bars. And so here, we did a 250 pound in the front and a 300 pound spring in the back, just so we can got some firmness, but it's just not going to rattle your teeth out. And that's,
we have had cars that we've had to make that change.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not enjoyable.
Yeah. When you go over to coilovers, and we talked about it in one of our earlier podcasts, is you need to reinforce that rear cross member right behind the engine. So we've got reinforcements back there, which you'll see, along with, which we haven't done before, this adjustable strut tower bar in the back, so we can adjust preload. And it just looks cool, and it's got extra heim joints, and but it is also functional as well. So that's a key piece.
Always the best way to go.
Yeah,
Functional and looks good.
and it's got to look good. And as you do those coilover conversions, your rear spring plate changes, right? So we do the 935 spring plate, which we put in the past, 3 or 4 builds.
And we just decided to do the rear in this one, right? Not
Correct.
The front.
Yeah, we wanted
We didn't want too many heim joints, right?
Yeah, versus like the Oslo build that we did. A lot of heim joints, 935 front and rear. This one we want to keep it, more of a canyon carver with light track use. So we did upgrade the front cross member to the aluminum cross member out of the SC and the Carrera. It's lighter. I think you save about 4.5 pounds. But the biggest reason for going with that is you gain more space for really large master cylinder setups. So right now we're doing a 23 millimeter, but it allows you to do like these the master cylinder bridges. So you can have dual masters and all that. It gives you more room. Plus you have a stock mounting place for the fuel pump. So with a larger engine, you're going to want a fuel pump in the front. So number of reasons why it's better to go with those, but lightweights. And it's pretty, so, I mean.
It looks good, as long as it looks good.
Exactly.
Well, maybe.
Usual suspects, turbo tie rods. Every car needs them, so it's almost not even a talking point, but.
That would be expected.
Yeah. But as you start, these Bilsteins have the spindles or raised spindles, 19 millimeters, pretty standard. So we can try to maintain stock geometry with a lowered car. And then elephant bumps to your kit to make sure that your tie rod ends are where they need to be.
As you can tell, Greg orders all the suspension.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here and like, it sounds good.
I might be specking out this car and building
He's
it.
done a lot of suspension research recently. And so that actually, you were talking about master cylinders, so that brings us into the brakes. And the brakes, we're going to boxer setup, correct?
Correct.
And that is front and rear?
Front and rear.
Does that run off the, what master cylinder does that run off? Is that,
It's going to run off the 23 millimeter non-boosted master cylinder.
and that would be common on which car?
You'd find that normally those are used for when you're adding turbo brakes or anything that's going to be 4-piston to a non-boosted car. So it's a requirement for going with, if you're doing boxer caliper upgrades, 930 caliper upgrades, big reds, any of those require that larger master. I love boxer calipers. I mean, they're light.
They're doing them on a few cars now. And
Oh, yeah.
It turns out to be great.
Put them on my car. I mean,
and
they're cheap.
Yeah, they're price-wise, you can't really beat that.
No.
You know, it's not like and again, we're not trying to go cheap on this build, but it's
Right.
going to fit in our, in whatever wheels we
Sure.
want. But even if you wanted to go 15s, which I think we might go 15s.
So,
we're
yeah,
not
with-
sure yet, 15s or 16s.
With boxer calipers, you can do 15s. Same with 930 turbo calipers, but the 930 turbos require a way bigger rotor. They're heavier. They will fit under a 15 if you shave the fins off.
But it's about the same brake power, right?
Yeah, and
it's a more updated,
yeah,
So 930 brakes
yeah,
are awesome.
Yeah, you get better braking characteristics out of the 930 because it's going to require a larger rotor. But that's just it's not what is really needed for this
Well,
particular
930,
build.
in order to fit them in, well, I guess in 15s, if you get custom wheels, you can fit them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so, but the big reds, if you wanted to do that, because that was one of our thoughts, you needed to go at least.
Yeah,
what size,
generally you
15,
start going 16 inches, 17 inches, you're doing big reds. Depending on how you're having your wheels made, but
Yeah.
if you're sticking with 15s, which we would like to go
It's
on.
not going to be too necessary with how light this car is going to be also.
Right. It's a matter of matching your braking power to your engine. And the boxer brakes are fantastic. They'll be plenty grippy. They're originally what was fitted on this car would have been the aluminum S caliber brakes, which they were lightweight, but they had a lot of flex to them, and they were 2-piston. So, the boxers already give you that upgrade of being 4-piston, a larger pad surface area, and they're stronger. They're monoblock, so they're not going to have that much flex as those early aluminum calipers.
That's good.
So, and that's it'll be Carrera rotors matched to those. So it's 24-inch in the front, 20-inch on the rear. So all of the vendors have been extremely helpful in helping us pick the best packages for these vehicles, and putting together a few custom components. When you start talking about like radial to axle adapters for these calipers and these little custom bits that normally don't hit the market. So when working with Tarrant and Rebel Racing and Elephant, they're just proven names in this industry.
They've always been good for us.
Yeah.
Good to us, for us.
Right.
So.
One of the things we kind of touched on a little bit, but I think customers, there's kind of a gray area. It's kind of a knowledge gap in what the various bushings are and why we use them, and it's part of that that suspension formula that we put together depending on how we want a car to drive, what are its characteristics. And so when we do these custom builds for customers, we have to ask them, what do you drive now? How do you like to drive? Or is this going to be primarily a track car? Is it a street car? And bushings play a big role in that. People like...
And it's something that people usually don't think about.
Yeah.
When you think suspension, you think shocks. You think maybe torsion bars, but
Sure.
like bushings are, rubber pieces that sit on your control arm.
They're all your pivot points.
But, yeah, I mean, and then, rubber, polygraphite, bronze,
thermoplastic, monoballs, hand joints.
It's going to completely affect how your car is going to drive. So.
Absolutely. And, a stock setup would be, they rolled out of the factory with rubber. And, rubber is...
Which is still a good setup.
Sure.
And it's still, yeah.
No, I mean, it absorbs a lot. You get the softest feel there, and that's, what, Porsche is trying to balance comfort and performance. But you do, with rubber, get a lot of deflection and friction. So deflection and how these pivot points are working. Are they working precisely? Or are they just going to move around a bit? And then the friction and whether or not it's, actually in the bushing sleeve going to try and grab or pinch. And so, we rarely do rubber. we tend to like to move over to polygraphite, the next level up.
That is my favorite, I believe, and it really just improves the handling, and it doesn't make it too stiff either. It's
Right.
a good in between.
A little stiffer, less deflection, less friction. It is, it's self-lubricating because of that graphite, so polyurethane usually tends to like to grip or grab. And on top of that, we usually clearance our bushings as well, because people would just shove these bushings on there and,
make 'em work.
you take these joints and they kind of click in various settings, and, you want these things to be free moving. And, a lot of people order bushings that go with, poly bronze or thermoplastics because they look neat, but don't recognize that, there's a level of maintenance that goes along with them. Bronze is a rigid bronze bushing.
Yeah,
And
it can be very stiff.
Yeah, it's gonna drastically reduce your deflection and your friction. Great for track, but when it comes to trying to absorb any harsh roads, it's a tougher ride.
I've heard a lot of complaints on the brass just because it's people who, because if you don't educate yourself, if you don't know, and you say, oh yeah, bronze sounds cool, that sounds awesome. Yeah, but
Right.
when you're driving it just primarily on the road, then you're probably not.
And they have grease fittings that if you don't grease them, those things will seize up. And so there's routine maintenance there. There's a few other, they're like thermoplastic that, provide the same characteristics as bronze, but they're a self-impregnated, self-lubricated plastic. So they're, in the realm of like rigid bushings, I really like those. If you're really a dedicated track car, for a street car, I wouldn't go with them.
Polygraphite's a great setup for the street, and we haven't had any customers complain about those.
Right.
Even if you have a stock car and you're just trying to go one step up, it's a nice little addition for those.
Then you go to the Peak, and that's monoball and Heim joints, your 935 setups.
I can't even remember when we put actual rubber on a car recently.
Hardly any reason to.
Yeah.
You'll get better wear characteristics and a better performance out of polygraphite. And we still do monoballs and Heim joints, depending on where they're at, what the car is being used for. It's a very precision joint, so little to no deflection and friction. And it's a really, really tight setup. It just drives tight for a year. And then you got to take it in and make sure all those joints are tight again and lubricated. If they don't have dust covers on them, you really need to pick these out based on how you're going to drive the car.
So that's going to wrap us up on the Smyrna for at least part one.
Right.
We're going to go into more detail in another episode about engine, transmission, and some of the other aspects of the car.
Right.
So thank you for joining us on the Pacenotes podcast about all things Porsche. If anyone has any more questions on the Smyrna or is interested in doing another build with us, or just any questions in general about Porsches, feel free to contact us, and thank you for joining us.